Chapter 4 Bloomsbury. The house in which I experienced ghostly footsteps is not the only house in Red Lion Square that is said to be haunted. Close to it is another house bearing a similarly unenviable reputation. It is believed that a girl was murdered on the staircase, and that the ghost alleged to be seen on the staircase and in certain of the rooms is hers. It is said, also, that a ghostly reenaction of the tragedy, in which this girl played so unfortunate a role, takes place periodically, sounds of footsteps, sighing and groaning being heard in various parts of the house and on the stairs, and a scuffle, which always terminates in an ominous thud on the hall floor beneath. I believe many efforts have been made to lay the ghost, but as, I understand, the phenomena are still experienced, it is obvious that all such efforts have proved futile. There is a rumor in the neighborhood that the ghost of Oliver Cromwell occasionally parades up and down the square garden at night, usually on very stormy nights. Some historians assert that soon after the Restoration, the bodies of Oliver Cromwell, Ireton, and Bradshaw were disinterred at Westminster Abbey and dragged thence on sledges to Tyburn, where they were hung on gallows till sunset. They were then cut down, and decapitated. The trunks were thrown into a hole at the foot of the gallows, while the heads were fixed on poles on the roof of Westminster Hall. There are various traditions as to what subsequently became of the latter. Before being hanged at Tyburn, the bodies, according to one tradition, were taken to the Red Lion Inn at Holborn. Now some writers think the word Tyburn was not only applied to the spot at the north end of the park, a spot that was situated in what was then styled Tyburn Lane, but that it was applied to any place in London where executions were of more or less frequent occurrence. One such spot, about the time of the Restoration, occupied a prominent position in St. Giles's parish, close to where the thoroughfare now called Tottenham Court Road terminates, and another was so close to the site of Red Lion Square that one might, not unreasonably, conclude that it occupied the space that later became the Square Garden, a conclusion which is borne out by the fact that for many years an obelisk, bearing the inscription, Obtusum obtusiorus ingenii monumentum, quid me respicis, viator, vade stood in the said garden. One Mr. Jesse, and the other writers referred to, were of the opinion that this inscription bore some cryptic reference to the bones of the three renegades that were interred in the garden, the obelisk being erected to mark the spot where they lie. Granted, the site of the Square Garden was the Tyburn which witnessed the revolting exhibition of the mouldering remains, this theory that the remains were buried in the ground over which the obelisk was subsequently erected is extremely probable. It certainly gained the credence of many people, who declared that the ghosts alleged to haunt the square, more particularly the Square Garden, were those of Cromwell, Ireton, and Bradshaw. A story that was current in the immediate neighborhood, during the Great War, came to my knowledge thus: I was returning to my quarters in the square, late one night, when I found a crowd of people, mostly foreigners, talking excitedly, just outside the Square Garden. Thinking they were discussing the air raid which had taken place a few days before in that district, I halted, but the remark I was about to make on the damage it had done in Red Lion Street died upon my lips, as I caught the word ghosts, and I at once asked a swarthy-looking Italian, who might have been an organ grinder or ice cream vendor, what it referred to. "Why," he said, in quite good English, "two women declare they have seen the ghosts that are supposed to haunt the square," and he grinned. "It is no laughing matter," a woman who was standing close to us exclaimed, angrily. "We did see them. Other people have seen them too." "What were they like?" I inquired. "Three men, wearing long black cloaks and hats with old-fashioned high crowns and very wide brims," the woman replied. "My friend and I were passing the garden, just about where we are standing now, when we saw them suddenly cross the road in front of us. They were walking abreast, and passed right through the iron railings into the garden." "How could they?" someone asked, incredulously. "Well, they did," the woman responded. "You can ask my friend. We both saw them. They went through the railings, as if there were no railings there, and suddenly disappeared." "That's right," her friend, the other woman, said, joining us. "Directly they had passed into the garden we lost sight of them. They vanished. "There's nothing to laugh at," an old man remarked to a boy who was giggling. "I believe every word these ladies have said, for I've seen one or two equally queer things myself, though not here." I asked him to tell me what they were, but he would not. He informed me, however, that the two women were by no means the only people who had had experiences of that sort in the square, and he himself knew people who had seen the three men in the old-fashioned hats and cloaks. "But that was years ago," he added, "about 1870. These three ghosts, or phantoms, or whatever else you may like to term them, only appear, it seems, either before or during some great war." That was all the information I could extract, and as the crowd was now dispersing, I came away with the rest. A house in Great James Street is haunted by ghostly noises, such as footsteps and creakings, and the phantom of a man who periodically visits a flat in it. A tenant of this particular flat told me of his experiences with this ghost. One night he heard someone moving about in the sitting room, footsteps then came into the bedroom, which communicates with the sitting room by means of folding doors, and cautiously approached his bed. After a brief pause, during which he found himself wholly incapable of action, hands groped their way surreptitiously over the bedclothes towards his throat. The spell that had hitherto bound him was then fortunately broken, and he was able to dive under the bedclothes, just in time to evade the hands that were about to clutch hold of him. After an interval, which seemed a lifetime, the hands were removed, and the steps slowly retreated to the sitting room, and thence on to the landing outside. Then and not till then did he sum up the courage to emerge from under the bedclothes. Once, he told me, a friend of his who was staying with him, returning home one night before him, found a strange man in the sitting room. He was in evening dress, and had a white handkerchief bound round his face in such a manner that only his forehead was visible. However, although apparently blindfolded, the intruder, directly my friend's friend entered the sitting room, passed through the folding doors into the bedroom beyond. My friend's friend immediately followed him, but the room was empty. He had disappeared, and disappeared most inexplicably, because there was no mode of exit from the room other than through the folding doors and a window, which was closed at the bottom, and was, besides, a great height from the ground, the flat being on the third floor. This, I believe, is the only occasion on which a ghost has been seen during my friend's tenancy. At my friend's wish, I went to the flat one evening, during his temporary absence, for the purpose of investigation. I was accompanied by a friend from Ceylon and an estate agent, whom I got to know through consulting him at his office about buying a house, and who struck me as being singularly level-headed and rational. The three of us sat in the dark, or rather without any artificial light, on the staircase. For a long time nothing happened, and we were beginning to think we had drawn a blank, when, quite suddenly, footsteps came running up the stairs towards us. The moonlight, pouring in a brilliant white stream through a window on the staircase, lighted up the whole of the flight immediately facing us, and yet, though the footsteps now were close to us, we could see no one. When they reached the stair immediately below the one I was standing on they halted, and I was conscious of being scrutinized intently by some presence, which, although invisible, was intensely real. The estate agent, now being badly scared, switched on the light, whereupon my uncanny sensation ceased, and the presence in front of me ceased, so to say, with it. We came away soon afterwards, my friends having had quite enough of it for one night. In Cartwright Gardens, not far from Great James Street, there are at least two houses reputed to be haunted. Years ago, Cartwright Gardens was known as Burton Crescent. It is said to have changed its name in consequence of two murders that gained it a very unenviable notoriety. The first occurred in the winter of 1878. A lodger returning to number 4 Burton Crescent, late one day in December of that year, found his landlady, Mrs. Samuels, lying on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood. Her head had been beaten in by repeated blows. Mary Donovan, a charwoman who had worked for Mrs. Samuels, was arrested on the charge of murdering her, but acquitted by Mr. Flowers, the magistrate before whom she was brought, on the grounds that there was not sufficient evidence to warrant him committing her for trial. His speech in court seemed strangely contradictory. "I am of the opinion, however," he said, "that the evidence against you, although there are many facts in it which would point you out as having committed that offense, i.e. the murder of Mrs. Samuels, is not such as to justify me in placing you on your trial." One wonders why, if there were so many facts pointing to her having killed Mrs. Samuels, he did not commit her for trial. A good deal of dissatisfaction was expressed at his verdict, and such undesirable publicity did the house acquire on account of the murder and alleged subsequent haunting that its number was finally changed. 6 years later the Crescent again came into notoriety through another crime, also destined to remain an unsolved mystery. Anne Yates, a pretty girl of the unfortunate class, was found one day in March, 1884, in a back room on the first floor of number 12 Burton Crescent, strangled. The crime, which in several respects resembled the Great Coram Street murder of 1872, was never brought home to anyone. As in the case of the Samuels mystery, the house gained such an unenviable reputation, not only on account of the murder, but also on account of the ghostly manifestations that, according to rumor, were subsequently experienced there, that its number was changed, and soon afterwards Burton Crescent was rechristened Cartwright Gardens. For many years now it has enjoyed complete immunity, at least so far as is generally known, from any unpleasant happenings. I have alluded to the Great Coram Street murder. Few crimes created a more painful sensation. The story of it, in brief, was this. On Christmas morning, 1872, Harriet Buswell, a pretty ballet girl of loose character, was found in a back room on the second floor of number 12 Great Coram Street. 12 would seem to be a sinister number, it has figured in several very horrible crimes, with her throat cut. A strange man was seen to enter the room with her late on Christmas Eve, and the police arrested Dr. Gottfried Hessel, believing him to be that individual. He was proved, however, not to have left his hotel that night, and he was consequently acquitted. The real murderer was never brought to justice, and the crime is still one of the many unsolved London mysteries. So great a notoriety did Great Coram Street acquire on account of it, that its name was forthwith altered to Coram Street, while all the houses in it were renumbered. For years, however, the house in which the murder was believed to have taken place was reputed haunted, and a back room in it, on the second floor, so rumor asserted, was kept locked, because of the unearthly sounds that were heard at night proceeding from it. One of the best authenticated cases of a phantom of the living occurred in the British Museum in the year 1888.1 on Thursday, April 12 of that year. Drive W. Wynne Westcott, the well-known coroner, made an appointment to meet the Reverend T. W. Lemon and Mr. A. B. in the reading room of the British Museum the following morning, at 11:15. When Friday morning came, however, Drive Westcott was laid up in bed with a feverish catarrh and unable, in consequence, to keep his appointment. Just about the time he should have been there, Ryan, one of the umbrella attendants, who knew him well by sight, saw him walk past and enter the reading room. Some minutes later, Mrs. Salmon, a friend of the doctor's, saw him walking about the reading room, as if inquiring for someone, and then take his customary seat. She was so sure it was the doctor, that, on Mr. A. B. asking her if she had seen him, she said, yes, and told Mr. A. B. where to find him. He went to the seat she mentioned, but no doctor was there. Indeed, at that hour he was, as I have said, in bed at home, suffering from a severe catarrh. Granted that it was not someone very like him Mrs. Salmon and Ryan had seen, who or what was it? Drive Westcott was, naturally, thinking very earnestly of his assignation and deploring his friend's disappointment at his inability to keep it. Hence, is it not feasible to suppose, that, the conditions being favorable, projection had taken place, that is to say that the doctor's immaterial self or ego, detaching itself from his material body, had actually visited the spot he was mentally visualizing? What Mrs. Salmon and Ryan had seen was, consequently, a phantom of the living. Mrs. Salmon's testimony to the incident in the museum is as follows: Mr. A.B. asked me if I had seen Drive Westcott. I said, yes, about 5 minutes ago, and he is sitting where he usually sits. Mr. A.B. went to the seat, and came and told me Drive Westcott was not there. I said, oh, he must be, it's only a few minutes since I saw him sit down. I went myself. He was not to be seen. I went to the man who takes the umbrellas and said, have you seen Drive Westcott? Yes he said, he went into the room about 5 minutes ago. This is exactly what took place. L. Pound and Salmon. January 24, 1898. This testimony was subsequently published. The case is not, perhaps, more credible than one which happened in Newquay, Cornwall, oddly enough in August of the same year. I sent an account of it to the Society for Psychical Research, and the account, verbatim, was published in their journal in the autumn of 1899. In brief, what happened was this: a young boy at the time, I was spending my holidays in Newquay. The house in which I, together with my family, stayed, was a moderately sized apartment house. There were no other lodgers, but we had a friend staying with us, a Miss D from Birmingham. One morning, she and my eldest sister went out to do some shopping in the town. About half an hour later my two other sisters, my old nurse and myself were in the hall. I was on the staircase leading into it. Suddenly Miss D appeared on the staircase, just above where I was standing. Down she came, passing so close to me it was a narrow staircase that I felt her dress brush against me, into the hall. Without looking at my sisters and my nurse, who were staring at her in astonishment, as they had seen her go out shortly before, she entered the sitting room, closing the door behind her. My sisters and I at once opened it. The room was empty, save for the furniture, and there was no trace of Miss D anywhere. At the time we had all four seen her, or what we all took to be her. She and my eldest sister were in the town shopping. Presumably, what we had seen was her projection. Point 1, to quote another haunting connected with the British Museum. Everyone knows of the unlucky mummy case there, but it is not everyone who has heard of Catabit. Catabit was, so I understand, in her lifetime a priestess of the College of Amen, Amun, R.A., which was founded at Thebes, during the 18th dynasty of the New Empire, in honor of the god Amun, and she was, presumably, deemed of sufficient importance to have her body mummified, and, thus preserved, deposited in some Egyptian catacomb. Some British Goth taking her thence brought her to England, and she now resides, NB not rests, in the Oriental Department of the British Museum. I say resides instead of rests, because, if there be any truth in certain rumors, she is very far from resting. Every now and then ladies testify to seeing her head move, and some go so far as to suggest she walks at night. Some time ago I asked an official on duty in the Oriental Department if he had ever seen or heard anything uncanny there, but he would not commit himself. Some people say they have, he persisted, and that is all I could get out of him. On one occasion I had rather a strange experience there myself. I was looking at Catabit, wondering what she was like in her lifetime, when I heard a slight cough immediately behind me. I turned round, but could see no one near me. After a little while I heard another cough, rather too near me to be pleasant, but again, on turning round, I could see no one. This I thought very strange. However, I should, in all probability, have attributed it to some peculiarity of the acoustic properties of the museum, but for the fact that, as I was descending the staircase into the entrance hall, I again heard the cough, this time almost in my ear. Its origin seemed perfectly plain to me then, and I have not visited the Oriental Department of this museum since.